The complete works of Swami Vivekananda, Volume 3, Section 4, The Sages of India, Part 2. Even the Gita, the great philosophy itself, does not compare with that madness. For in the Gita, the disciple is taught slowly how to walk towards the goal. But here is the madness of enjoyment, the drunkenness of love, where disciple and teachers and teaching and books and all these things have become one. Even the ideas of fear and God and heaven, everything has been thrown away. What remains is the madness of love. It is the forgetfulness of everything, and the lover sees nothing in the world except that Krishna and Krishna alone. When the face of every being becomes a Krishna, when his own face looks like Krishna, when his own soul has become tingled with the Krishna's color, that was the great Krishna. Do not waste your time upon little details. Take up the framework, the essence of the life. There may be many historical discrepancies discrepancies. There may be interpolation in the life of Krishna. All these things may be true, but at the same time, there must have been a basis, a foundation for this new and tremendous departure. Taking the life of any other sage or prophet, we find that the prophet is only the evolution of what had gone before him. And we find that that prophet is only preaching the ideas that had been scattered about his own country, even in his own times. Great doubts may exist, even as to whether the prophet existed or not. But here, I challenge anyone to show whether these things, these ideals, work for work's sake, love for love's sake, duty for duty's sake, were not originally ideas with Krishna, and as such, there must have been someone with whom these ideas originated. They could not have been borrowed from anybody else. They were not floating about in the atmosphere when Krishna was born. But the Lord Krishna was the first preacher of this. His disciple Vyas took it up and preached it up to mankind. This is the highest idea of picture. The highest thing we can get out of him is Gopi Gopi Jnana Vallabh. The highest thing that we can get out of him is Gopi Jnana Vallabh. That is the beloved of the gopis of Vrindavan. When that madness comes in your brain, when you understand the blessed gopis, then you will understand what love is. When the whole world will vanish, when all other consideration will not have died out, when you will become pure hearted with no aims, no other aims, not even the search after truth, then and then alone, with will come to you the madness of that love, the strength and the power of that infinite love which the gopis had, that love for love's sake. That is the goal. When you have got that, you have got everything. To come down to the lowest tantrum, Krishna, the preacher of the Gita, there is an attempt in India now which is like putting the cart before the horse. Many of our people think that the Krishna, as the lover of the gopis, is something rather uncanny, and the Europeans do not like it much. Dear so and so does not like it. Certainly, then, the gopis have to go. Without the sanction of the European, how can Krishna live? He cannot. In the Mahabharata, there is no mention of the gopis except in one or two places, and those not very remarkable places. In the prayer of Draupadi, there is mention of Vrindavan life, and in the speech of Shishupala, there is again mention of the Vrindavan. All these are interpolations. What the European do not want must be thrown off. They are interpolations. The mention of the gopis and of the Krishna too. Well, with this man stepped in commercialization, where even the ideal of the religion has become commercial. They are all trying to go to heaven by doing something here. The banna wants compound interest, wants to lay by something here and enjoy it there. Certainly, the gopis have no place in such a system of thoughts. From that ideal love, we come down to the lower stratum of Krishna, the preacher of Gita, the lower stratum of Krishna, the preacher of Gita. Then the Gita, no better commentary on the Vedas has been written or can be written. The essence of the Shrutis of 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 the Upanishad is hard to be understood. Seeing that there are so many commentaries, each one tries to interact or interpret in his own way. Then the Lord Himself comes, He who is the inspirer of the Shrutis, to show us the meaning of them. As a preacher of the Gita, and today India wants nothing better, the world wants nothing better than that method of interpretation. It is a wonderful that subsequent interpreters of the spiritual and scriptures, even commenting upon Gita, many times could not catch the meaning, many times could not catch the drift. For what do you find in Gita, and what is the modern commentators? One non-dualism commentator takes up an Upanishad, and there are so many dualistic passages, and he twists and tours them into some meaning and wants to bring them all into the meaning of his own. If a dualistic commentator comes, there are so many non-dualistic texts which he begins to torture to bring them all around to the dualistic meaning. But you find in Gita there is no attempt or at torture anyone can make or any one of them can do. They are all right, says the Lord, for slowly and gradually the human soul rises up and up, step after step, from the gross to the fine, from the fine to the finer, until it reaches the absolute, the goal. That is what is in the Gita. Even the Karma Kanda is taken up, and it is shown that although it cannot give salvation directly, but only indirectly, yet that is also valid. Images are valid indirectly. Ceremonies forms everything. Ceremonies forms everything is valid only with one condition: purity of the heart. For the worship is valid and leads to the goal if the heart is pure, if the heart is pure and the heart is sincere. And all these various modes of worship are necessary. Else, why should they be? Why should they be there? Wicked people who invented. Why should they be there? Religion and sect are not the work of hypocrites and the wicked people who invented all this to get a little money are so some of our modern men want to think. However reasonable that explanation may be, it is not true, and they were not invented that way at all. They are all the outcomes of the necessity of human soul. They are all here to satisfy the hankering and thirst of different classes of human minds, and you need not preach against them. The day when that necessity will cease, they will vanish along with the cessation of the necessity, and so long as that necessity remains, they must be there in spite of your preachings, in spite of your criticism. You may bring the sword or the gun into the play. You may deluge the world with human blood. But as long as there is necessity for the idols, they must remain. These forms and all the various steps in religion will remain, and we understand from the Lord Krishna why they should. A rather sadder chapter of India's history comes now. In the Gita, we already hear the distant sound of the conflict of sect, and the Lord comes in the middle of the to harmonize them all. He, the great preacher of harmony, the greatest teacher of harmony, Lord Krishna, he says, "In me there are all strung like pearls upon a thread. In me they are all strung like pearls upon a thread. We already hear the distant sound, the murmurs of the conflict, and possibly there was a period of harmony and calmness when it broke out anew, not only on religious ground but also possibly on the caste ground. The fight between the two powerful factors in our community, the king and the priest, and from the topmost crest of the wave that deluged India for nearly 1,000 years, we see another glorious figure, and that was our Gautama Shakumani, Shak, Shakyamuni, Shakyamuni, Gautam Shankyamuni. And that was our Gautam Shankyamuni. You all know about his teachings and preachings. We worship him as God incarnation, the greatest, boldest preacher of the morality that the world ever saw, the great Karma Yogi, as a disciple of himself, as it were. The same Krishna came to show how to make his theories practical. There came once again the same voice that in the Gita preached. Even the least bit done of this religion saves from the great fear. Even the least bit done of this religion saves from great fear. Women or Vaishyas or even Shudras all reach the highest goal. Women or Vaishyas or even Shudras all reach the highest goal. Breaking the bondage of all, the chain of all, declaring liberty to all to reach the highest goal. Come to the word of Gita, roll like thunder the mighty words of Krishna. Even this life they have conquered relatively, whose mind are firmly fixed upon the sameness. For God is pure and the same to you all. Therefore, such are said to be living in God. Thus, seeing the same Lord equally present everywhere, the sage does not injure the self by self, and thus reaches the highest goal, as it were to give a living example of this preaching, as it were to make at least one part of it practical. The preacher himself came in another form, and this was Shakyamuni, the preacher to the poor and the miserable, he who rejected even the language of gods to speak in the language of people, so that he might reach the hearts of the people. He who gave up a throne to live with the beggar and the poor and the downcast. He who pressed the paraha to his breast like a second ram. You all know about his great work, his grand character, but the work had one great defect, and for that we are suffering even today. No blame attaches to the Lord. He is pure and glorious, but unfortunately, such high ideals could not be well assimilated by the different uncivilized and uncultured races of men who flocked within the fold of Aryans. These races, with various varieties of superstition and hideous worship, rushed within the fold of Aryans, and for a time appeared as if they had become civilized. But before a century had passed, they brought out their snakes, their ghosts, and all other things their ancestors used to worship, and thus the whole of India became one degraded mass of superstition. The earlier Buddhists, in their rage against the killing of animal, had denounced the sacrifice of Vedas, and this sacrifice used to be held in every house. There was a fire burning, and that was all paraphernalia. That was all paraphernalia of worship. These sacrifices were obligatory, and in their places came gorgeous temple, gorgeous ceremonies, and gorgeous priests. All that you see in India in the modern time. I smile when I read books written by some modern people who ought to have known better that the Buddha was the destroyer of the Brahminical idolatry. Little do they know that Buddhism created Brahminism and the idolatry in India. There was a book written a year or two ago by a Russian gentleman who claimed to have found out the very curious life of Jesus Christ. And in one part of the book, he says that Jesus Christ went to the temple of Jagannath to study his with Brahmins, but became disgusted but became disgusted with their exclusiveness and their idols, and so he went to the lamas of the Tibet instead, became perfect and went home. To any man who knows anything about Indian history, that very statement proves that whole thing was a fraud because temple of Jagannath is an old Buddhistic temple. We took this and others over and re-Hinduized them. We shall have to do many things like that yet. That is a Jagannath, and there was not one Brahmin there then. And yet we are told that Jesus Christ came to study with the Brahmins there. So say our great Russian archaeologist. Thus, in spite of the preachings of the mercy to animals, in spite of the sublime ethical religion, in spite of the hair-splitting discussion about the existence or non-existence of the permanent soul, the whole building of Buddhism tumbled down piecemeal, and the ruin was simply hideous. I have neither the time nor the inclination to describe to you the hideousness that came in the wake of Buddhism. The most hideous ceremony, the most horrible, the most obscene books that human hands ever wrote or the human brain ever conceived, the most bestial form that ever passed under the name of religion have all been the creation of degraded Buddhism. But India has to leave, and the Spirit of the Lord descended again. He who declared, I will come, where never virtues subside, came again, and this time the manifestation was in the south. And up rose a young Brahmin of whom it has been declared that at the ages of 16 he had completed all his writings. The marvelous boy Shankaracharya arose. The writings of the boy of 16 was wonders of the modern world, and so was the boy. He wanted to bring back the Indian world to its pristine purity, but think of the amount of the task before him. I have told you a few points about the state of things that existed in India. All these horrors that you are trying to rejoice or reform are the outcome of that reigns of degeneration or degradation. The Tartars and the Baluchis, the Tartar and the Baluchis, all the hideous races of mankind came to India and became Buddhist and assimilated with us and brought their national custom and whole of our nation national life became huge page of the most horrible and most bestial customs. What was the most that was the inheritance which that boy got from the Buddhist, and from that time of this the whole work in India is reconquest of this Buddhistic degeneration or degradation by the Vedanta. It is still going on. It is not yet finished. Shankara came a great philosopher and showed that the real essence of the Buddhism and that of the Vedanta are not very different, but that the disciples did not understand the master and have degraded themselves, denied the existence of the soul and God, and have become ethics. That was what Shankara showed. And all the Buddhists began to come back to the old religion, but then they had become accustomed to all these forms. What could you be done? Then came the brilliant Ramanuj. Shankara, with the great intellect, I am afraid, had not a great a heart, had not as great a heart. Ramanuja's heart was greater. He felt for the downtrodden. He sympathized with them. He took up the ceremonies, the accretions that had gathered and made them pure so far as they could be, and instituted new ceremonies, new methods of worship for the people who absolutely required them. At the same time, he opened the door to the higher spiritual worships from the Brahmin to the Paraha. That was Ramanuja's work. That work rolled on, invaded the north, was taken up by some great leaders there, but that was much later, during the Mohammedans' rule, and the brightest of this prophet of comparatively modern time in the north was Chaitanya. You may mark one characteristic since the time of Ramanuj, the opening of the door of spirituality to everyone. That was or that has been the watchword of all the prophets succeeding Ramanuj, as it had been the watchword of all the prophets before Shankara. I do not know why Shankara should be represented as rather exclusive. I do not find anything in his writings which is exclusive, as in the case of the declaration of Lord Buddha, the exclusiveness that has been attributed to Shankara's teaching is most possibly not due to the teachings but to the incapacity of his disciples. This one great northern sage, Chaitanya, represented the mad love of gopis, himself a Brahmin, born on one of the most rationalist families of the days, himself a professor of logic fighting and gaining a word victory. For this, he had learnt from his childhood as the highest ideal of life, and yet through the mercy of some sages, the whole life of that man became changed. He gave up his fight, his quarrels, his professorship of logic and became one of the greatest teachers of bhakti the world has ever known. Mad Chaitanya. His bhakti rolled over the whole land of Bengal, bringing solace to everyone. His love knew no bounds. The saint or sinner, the Hindu or Mohammedan, the pure or impure, the prostitute or the street walker, all had a share of his love and all had a share of his mercy. And even to the present day, although greatly degenerated, has everything does become in time. His sector is the refuge of the poor, the downtrodden, of the outcast, of the weak, and of those who have been rejected by all society. But at the same time, I must remark for the truth's sake that we find this in the philosophic sect, we find wonderful liberalization. There is no man who follows Shankara who will say that all the different sects of India are really different. At the same time, he was the tremendous upholder of exclusiveness as regard caste. But with every Vaishnavic preachers, we find a wonderful liberalization has to teach of caste questions, but exclusiveness has regard religious question. One had a great head, the other had a great large heart, and the time was ripe for one to be born and embodied to the both these heads and heart. The time was ripe for one to be born, who is one body, who would have brilliant intellect of Shankara and the wonderfully expanse infinite heart of Chaitanya, one who would see in every sect the same spiritual working, the same God, one who would see God in everybody, one whose heart would weep for poor, for the weak, for the outcast, for the downtrodden, for everyone of one in this world, inside India and outside India, and at the same time, whose grand, brilliant intellect would conceive of such noble thoughts as would harmonize all conflicting sect not only in India but outside of India and bring a marvelous harmony, the universal religion of head and heart into existence. Such a man was born, and I had the good fortune to sit at his feet for years. The time was ripe, it was necessary that such a man should be born, and he came. And the most wonderful part of it was that his life work was just near the city, which was full of Western thoughts, a city which had run mad after this Occidental thoughts, a city which had run mad after these Occidental ideas, a city which had become more Europeanized than another city in the world. There he lived without any book learning whatsoever. This great intellect never learnt even to write his own name, but the most brilliant learned even to write his own name, but the most brilliant graduate of our university found in him an intellectual giant. He was a strange man, this Sri Ramakrishna Paramhans. It is a long, long story, and I have no time to tell anything about him tonight. Let me now only mention the great Sri Ramakrishna, the fulfillment of the Indian sages, the sage for the time, one whose teaching is just now in the present time most beneficial, and the mark and mark the divine power working behind the man, the son of the poor priest, born in and out of the way of village, unknown, unthoughtful of today is worshipped literally by thousands in Europe and America, and tomorrow will be worshipped by thousands more. Who knows the plan of Lord? Now, my brothers, if you do not see the hand, the finger of the providence, it is because you are blind, born blind. Indeed, if time comes and another opportunity, I will speak to you more fully about him. Only let me say now that if I have told you one word of truth, it was his and his alone. And if I have told you many things which were not true, which were not correct, which were not beneficial to the human race, they were all mine, and on me is the responsibility.